This is AWANI Global with me, Nailah Huda. And this month we take you through a series of reviews and reflections from the year 2025 and what we can expect from the coming year. With this episode looking specifically at issues surrounding conflict and the overall security environment in the Asia-Pacific region, from maritime tensions to strengthened alliances and new forms of cooperation. We want to understand key shifts and trends in the year 2025 which could potentially spell the fate for the region in the coming year. And joining us to unpack some of these key questions, we're very lucky to be joined by Professor Rebecca Strating, Director of La Trobe Center for Global Security and Professor of International Relations at La Trobe University, Melbourne. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. It's always wonderful to be in Malaysia.
Very happy to have you. If we could perhaps start with a sort of bigger picture kind of question, how would you describe the overall security environment in the Asia-Pacific region in the past year?
I think probably the word that I would use to describe the security environment is uncertain. So one of the things that we are seeing in 2025 is a lot of, I think, uncertainty about the direction of some of the major countries in the Asia-Pacific region. So I think one of the big news stories across the year has been the United States under the new Trump administration and what the Trump administration's policies in Asia will be. I think even though we've seen the national security strategy recently released, there's still a lot of uncertainty or confusion about what the United States really plans to do in this region and how that's going to affect its relationships with other countries. So on top of that, you also have the coercive tactics being employed, particularly by the People's Republic of China in maritime domain. We see it in the South China Sea, for example, which is also exacerbating tensions and concerns among regional countries about how to deal with that. And then there are sort of smaller conflicts that are breaking out in the region that are also concerning when we think about security. We saw, for example, the tensions between Cambodia and Thailand this year in the region. So I think there's a lot of turbulence in the region, and countries and analysts like myself are trying to make sense of a world that feels very different from the one that we know and the one that we are used to. So I think if we're talking about security, I really think that one of the biggest issues is just not being really clear about the intentions and the priorities, particularly of the two major players being the United States and China.
You pointed out a lot of interesting points there, one of them being, of course, maritime tensions getting a lot of attention this year, and we've seen these persistent tensions in the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, these key maritime routes. Do you think there are any sort of key shifts or trends that stood out to you particularly in the region in 2025?
I think what we see in 2025 is a continuation of what we saw in 2024 when we think about the West Philippine Sea, what the Philippines calls the West Philippine Sea, and the coercive tactics that China is employing in that particular maritime domain. So this is the use of fishing vessels of coast guards, the use of, say, water cannons to try to deny people from other countries using maritime space. So these sort of more dangerous manoeuvres. We're also seeing unsafe and unprofessional manoeuvres in the airspace above these maritime areas. And one of the issues around these sorts of encounters between different assets, whether they're military or non-military, is that it amplifies that risk that something might spark a broader conflict. And that adds to that uncertainty about the security environment. There's also a question about what sort of channels there are within the region, whether it's bilaterally or multilaterally, to reduce conflict or to manage crisis. So if crisis does occur and there is, you know, an encounter that, you know, that might potentially lead to some sort of outbreak of violence, the question is, what can countries do to reduce the likelihood of conflict breaking out in that situation?
Talking about the approach in tackling these kind of risks and concerns, maybe I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about alliances, where we're seeing one trend this year with the Asia Pacific becoming somewhat more inclined, or perhaps this has been going on for a couple of years now, not just this year, towards alliances. You know, we're seeing AUKUS to the Quad, US, Japan, Korea coordination, even new forms of cooperation with ASEAN. We're seeing ASEAN, GCC, China, a lot of global South sort of movements as well. Do you think that these sort of frameworks, this cooperation, help to stabilize the region in 2025, or perhaps put it even more at risk?
That's a really interesting question, and I think what we're seeing is this shift towards strategic minilateralism. So these smaller groupings of countries that might form around big issues, like the Quad has a long list of agenda items, or around smaller issues, you know, focusing in on specific areas of cooperation. And this is quite different from a regional order that is premised on multilateralism, so big institutions where there are lots of different actors, and it focuses on inclusion and, you know, a lot of actors being at the table who are able to set the agenda. So the strategic minilateralism is, I think, comes out of the fact that there are countries that are losing faith in multilateral organisations, or they want to get things done, but they're also coming out of the fact that there are concerns about other actors. So the Quad, for example, yes, it is an organisation that is devoted to delivering public goods, but it is also concerned about the rise of China in the region. So we're seeing the security environment deteriorating, and it's not clear to me that strategic minilateralism is really helping to improve the security environment, but neither is it contributing to the deterioration either.
Right. I want to bring this back a bit closer to home. Do you think, from Australia's point of view, how do you think it looks at, you know, the overall sort of regional security environment, perhaps evolving or changing in 2025?
So Australia, in its regional diplomacy, has been really focused on conflict prevention and working with other countries to develop a conflict prevention agenda that can do things like manage crises or develop early risk warning systems or engage in risk reduction. And the reason why Australia, in my view, is dedicating a lot of resources and time to the conflict prevention agenda in its work with ASEAN is because it is concerned about the security environment. It's concerned about what is going on in the maritime space, it's concerned about what is going on in airspace, and it is concerned that there is an environment in which there's not a lot of trust between particularly the big powers, the United States and China. There isn't a whole lot of channels of communication dedicated to crisis management that will be useful if there is an incident. And so the question is, how can countries across the region work together to try to create the sort of creative diplomacy required to reduce the risk of particularly great power conflict, because conflict that involves a great power will be the most consequential in the region.
You mentioned about this concern in ASEAN. How do you think perhaps we can contextualize this with the Thailand-Cambodia border issue, which is of course very current and it's ongoing, it's things are developing very fast. But how central do you think is Southeast Asia to the broader Indo-Pacific strategy for Australia?
I think Southeast Asia is very important to the Australia's Indo-Pacific concept. It says it quite often, so even when Australia is talking within the context of the Quad, for example, it always makes reference to ASEAN centrality. Australia tries to make it very clear that these minilateral arrangements are not trying to compete with ASEAN or the ASEAN-led mechanisms, and that also Australia is a central player in those ASEAN-led mechanisms that do include countries beyond the 11 ASEAN countries. So I think Southeast Asia is very important to Australia's concept of security. I think individually in Southeast Asia there are countries that are really developing pathways of cooperation. Australia and Indonesia, for example, just signed a very weighty defence agreement. Australia's relationship with the Philippines is going from strength to strength, particularly thinking about defence cooperation. And so I think Australia's messaging to Southeast Asia is sort of one of consistent engagement and wanting to support ASEAN initiatives. And so I expect to see in 2026 there will be more investment or a prioritisation of conflict prevention in terms of how Australia engages in the region. And this is really about preventive diplomacy. But we are also very interested in things like maritime security and economic security, understanding, for example, that things like online scamming and scam centres is an increasing concern. Also thinking about, you know, technology and cybersecurity. So there's a range of complex, interconnected issues that affect the security environment, and they're traditional. They're, you know, about militaries and they're about technology, but they're also non-traditional, about things like climate change and the environment. That means that it is increasingly difficult, I think, to find good solutions to some of these problems. And what that means is that countries across the region really need to double down on their cooperation and the collaboration to try and mitigate some of these very big and transnational problems.
Perhaps we'll see more of these minilateral strategic frameworks coming into the new year.
Perhaps we will.
Yep. Plenty more I'd like to pick your brain on, but that is all the time that we have today, and we will let you go. Thank you so much, Professor Rebecca, for joining us. That is all on AWANI Global at this session, but we'll be back shortly with another session taking a closer look at Southeast Asia. We'll be back shortly. This is AWANI Global, and in the previous session we looked at issues surrounding security and conflict in the Asia-Pacific region. But now we want to take a closer look at conflict, tensions and instability in Southeast Asia, from the Thailand-Cambodia border dispute to the overall security environment in Southeast Asia. What are some of the key shifts in 2025 and perhaps spelling the fate for the region in 2026. That's what we want to discuss in this session. And joining us to help unpack some of these key shifts from 2025, we have joining us Dr. Bradley Jensen Murg, Senior Advisor at the Cambodian Institute for Cooperation and Peace, CICP. Dr. Bradley is also Provost and Professor of International Relations at the Paragon University. Thank you so much for sitting down with us and not standing.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
Or otherwise I'd have a sore neck throughout the entire session. How are you doing?
Oh, wonderful. Looking forward to chatting.
We're very happy to have you, and I think we'd like to start with a sort of bigger picture kind of question. What do you think are some of the key shifts, trends, patterns coming out of Southeast Asia looking at conflict and tensions in the region?
Sure. I think the big theme of 2025 has been one of internal fragility combined with essentially external pressure. the conflicts that we see that have blown up between Thailand and Cambodia, as well as the continued expansion and lack of resolution of the Myanmar issue, this is a fragile region where these issues are going to continue. But at the same time, the U.S.-China rivalry has resulted in much more intensely this year, I think. ASEAN states very often conditioning their responses on the anticipated response of either Washington and or Beijing. And this produces a much more brittle security reality than we've seen in the past.
Do you think 2025 marked a sort of turning points for some of these conflicts, or do you think this was a continuation or sort of, simmering issues and tensions that was just blowing up this year?
For Myanmar, I do see it as continuity, essentially, as they lead up towards the election that they've declared. Of course, many competing views on that. The Cambodia-Thailand border dispute, this is obviously very long-standing and goes back to the French colonial period. And the historical side is continually there. But I think the scary aspect that we've seen from the conflict this year is just how much it's tied to internal factors, how much to domestic politics, and very much hoping that this will come to a conclusion by the end of 2025, but it looks very unlikely that that's going to be the case. This appears to be a very, very drawn-out issue that is going to take some time to resolve.
You mentioned a little bit there about how, we want to focus specifically on the Thailand-Cambodia border dispute, looking at these long-standing sort of historical grievances, but at the same time, combined with these, domestic political pressures. How do you see this sort of going into 2026? You don't see this resolving very quickly anytime soon, but looking specifically at these domestic political elements, what do you think are some of the trends we should look out for in 2026?
Absolutely. I think when this all began, and from just a pure political science perspective, there were definite political gains on both sides domestically. The standard rally around the flag effect and the focus on rallying popular nationalism against a standard traditional other state, the neighbor state.
Right.
But as things have developed, particularly since the ceasefire in September, I do think that things have shifted in terms of the political dynamics. Within Cambodia has a very consolidated government. It does not have an election on the cards for quite a while. And any political gains domestically it really will have taken off the table at this point. I've never seen this level of support within the kingdom for the royal government at this point. So Cambodia is consolidated and fairly stable. Conversely, I think at this point what we're seeing is Thailand is going into a general election in February, and our very big concern in Phnom Penh at present is that this will not be resolved until that election has taken place and Thai politics have hopefully reached a new political equilibrium. Because at this stage, and we look at some of the polling in Thailand, both on the ceasefire as well as next steps, and there's not a lot of will for it. So Thailand's political leaders do confront a challenge of if they want to resolve this, they also have to deal with, well, how do you resolve this while potentially being perceived to be weak by your voters, as well as political opponents playing the more nationalist than thou card. So our big concern right now is that this could simply, even if we get a temporary ceasefire in 2 or 3 days until election happens, this could continue to flare up again and again. And of course in Cambodia, the humanitarian situation is becoming much worse.
Would you say this is more so a symbolic sort of conflict, or do you think it carries some strategic, economic, security risks for both sides?
It definitely carries economic risk for both sides. I mean, security, let's actually go back there to begin with. We do, yes, for the reason that we are seeing obviously violent conflict and civilian casualties and so on and so forth. And the economic costs for Cambodia, very, very high. For Thailand, not as high, relatively, but still significant. For both countries, though, the costs that they're seeing, particularly this time of year, for two highly tourism-dependent economies, this is wiping out the high season, which for a country like Cambodia, where 17–18% of GDP is tourism, and it's mostly made during these 4 months. This is a major impact. The long term, and even the medium term, though, I think are even more serious. The longer this goes on, the more we see hardening on both sides in terms of future relations and future engagement. There is a declining will for deepening economic cooperation, and even the opposite, moving towards sort of a local version of decoupling, which is the antithesis of what every development institution, multilateral development bank says needs to happen in the global global, the greater Mekong sub-region, which is deeper trade, deeper investment, deeper integration. And this conflict already has set us back 3, 4, 5 years minimum.
I mean, before we started the interview, we were having a little bit of a chat, and you know, we talked about how this has also sort of developed into becoming a social media warfare as well, with disinformation and perhaps even misinformation. How do you think this perhaps complicates this conflict even more?
Oh, I think it's become terrifying since it began, the amount on both sides. And this does simply serve, I mean, the worst outcome is it simply gins up and it builds this hyper-nationalism more and more and more. It results in pressure being placed on leaders who otherwise would be very much willing to compromise, who are realistic about some of these outcomes, saying, well, I simply can't because the popular nationalism is simply so intense. Yeah. And I've been stunned to see how much misinformation. I mean, I would say this is Southeast Asia's first full social media war. Yeah.
No, that is scary, but perhaps coming into play as well is ASEAN potentially trying to flex its muscle a little bit in terms of conflict, resolution mechanism. And, we're seeing this role played by Malaysia as the mediator, one of the mediators, one of the external players getting involved. How do you see ASEAN coming into play, and particularly Malaysia's role as chair of ASEAN this year? Do you think there are mechanisms in managing this conflict? Did it hold up, or do you think this is where we saw their limitations exposed, with issues of non-interference, of course?
So Malaysia's role itself, I think Malaysia's done everything it possibly can within the unfortunate confines of ASEAN's institutional abilities. To such an extent that there is very much a desire that Malaysia stays on, even after its chairmanship, holding a mediating role, because it's been very successful, is highly trusted by both parties. The issue, though, however, is that ASEAN is much better at dealing with how to enforce peace agreements and how to mitigate the outcomes rather than trying to find peace. Because of the principle of non-interference and so, et cetera, ASEAN is, in practice, very, very limited. Now, the fact that we have the Cambodia-Thailand conflict at the same time that we have the Myanmar conflict, to my view, and I think to many other folks who specialize in studying ASEAN politics, and we've been saying it for a long time, but it's time to reconsider whether ASEAN is fully fit for purpose. We all love ASEAN, we all want ASEAN to succeed, but do some structural changes potentially need to be made to make it more effective in this space?
Other than Malaysia, of course, what got a lot of attention in the media was the role played by the US and China. How do you think this then complicates this as well?
So I think the U.S. was essentially the lead actor in July, but also that was very much a coincidence of timing. The U.S. was just about to roll out its final tariff numbers. Everybody was absolutely panicked, and this gave the U.S. the perfect tool to bring everybody to the negotiating table. Yeah. And again, and do it, and points to Washington on this, and do it essentially under an ASEAN leadership. China took a somewhat different approach. China's generally less confrontational on these lines, and did some private meetings in Shanghai. Had a different approach that it was wanted to go with, but the states chose the ASEAN track. So overall, this initially worked. At present, however, I think we're seeing a bigger challenge. And that's precisely because the Thai elections have come. Yep. So what might have worked for Washington, what did work rather for Washington in July, an economic threat that's essentially not long term, but it's a while off in terms of economic effects. That's really powerful when you're looking at it long term. But if you're a government looking at re-election in the next 45 days, you're not as concerned about long-term economic effects if it's something that could really harm you maintaining power. So that change in timing is why a lot of us are concerned at present that the U.S. will have to intervene along on utilizing other tools.
Looking specifically at the Thailand-Cambodia border clashes, what do you think will continue or change in the new year?
I think that if we're able to, if there's some, Thailand has, as of earlier today, basically stated that it would consider returning to a ceasefire, but with very clear requests for Cambodia. Cambodia said it's always been at the table. If hopefully we do see a ceasefire in the very, very near term, I would expect that it will not likely be durable, though, that we will see continued flare-ups. Again, I think the outcome here has to be the development of political stability in Thailand post-election. Absent that, it's going to be the domestic politics running it, not the broader security questions.
You know, of course, we have to keep in mind this episode is airing about a week or 2 weeks from the date of recording today, so there might be potentially a lot more developing in the next few days. But you know, taking a step back and looking at the region as a whole, what do you think the biggest risk for Southeast Asia heading into 2026?
I think they all kind of stem off the same word, spillover. We know the situation in Myanmar is becoming more challenging, and they have the election coming, et cetera. But so the possibility of continued spillover effects from that conflict are a big challenge. I think one issue that we've seen much more in northern mainland Southeast Asia that we need to pay attention to much more fully as a region are the spillover effects and the continuing genuine issues of scam compounds. The scam compound, cyber scamming issue is billions and billions of dollars. At the same time, the negative effects otherwise on criminality in the region, et cetera, are simply huge. So dealing with that and paying attention to that is vital. The third, and I say this because I know what's coming in 2026 in terms of our friends in the Philippines take over their chairmanship. And the Philippines has made very clear that they'd like to spend their focus on the South China Sea issue. It's a vital issue. South China Sea is the greatest security issue, if not in the region, obviously, but also globally in terms of the potential for, with the exception of Taiwan, however you include it, whether inside or outside. But preparing for a very, very serious, very challenging, very frank discussion of a South China Sea Code of Conduct next year. And this is a very large opportunity for ASEAN. It's also something that's absolutely essential. And this is going to be one of those areas where we're going to see a massive amount of disagreement, but it could also end up being one of the most important milestones in regional security in some time.
Keeping this in mind, what do you think are some of the sort of agenda items that should be prioritized by either policymakers, security planners, either within or outside the ASEAN framework for 2026?
So within ASEAN, I think it's continuing to focus on de-escalation. And I mean, whether it's in Myanmar or in the Cambodia-Thailand conflict, these are at the front of the table, front of the room, and they need to be focused on. Other areas of focus, I think, that we haven't touched on that aren't necessarily on a security side. I mean, South China Sea, et cetera. But for me, the other enormous area coming out of ASEAN this year is, or next year, is the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, which is the new digital trade package, harmonization package across ASEAN, estimated to double GDP in that sector from 1 trillion to 2 trillion. It's been delayed for a while. There's challenges still going on, but getting that through for the economic future of every single country is absolutely essential. So seeing how that goes is my other area of concern.
Definitely a lot to look out for in the years to come.
Absolutely, absolutely. Nothing's ever boring in ASEAN.
That's true. Plenty more I'd like to pick your brain on, but that is all the time that we have today. Thank you so much, Dr. Bradley, for joining us.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
That is all on AWANI Global this week and potentially this year as we wrap up our reflections for 2025. Plenty more to look out for in 2026, of course. So stay tuned to AWANI Global as we bring more discussions on what to expect around the world in terms of conflict, security and tensions, geopolitical issues. Definitely a lot of trends to look out for. But that is all with me on AWANI Global with me, Nailah Huda. We'll catch you next time.